Imagine a world without writing, no books, no scrolls, no digital archives. Yet somehow, ancient civilizations preserved vast troves of knowledge, passing down everything from star maps to sacred stories across hundreds of generations. They didn't use paper or pixels. Instead, they turned to the earth itself, carving their wisdom into stone, shaping the land into living libraries, and aligning monuments with the movements of the sun and stars. Think of the Nazca lines in Peru, enormous figures etched into the desert floor, visible fully only from the sky, or Stonehenge, that mysterious ring of standing stones that captures the solstice sun with breathtaking accuracy. These aren't just art or architecture, they are encoded messages, carefully designed storehouses of human understanding, built to last. This video is a journey into that lost world of knowledge storage, a time when memory was monumental and information was woven into the very fabric of the landscape. We'll explore how societies without writing developed astonishingly sophisticated systems to record everything from astronomical cycles and agricultural calendars to mythologies and navigation routes. They used standing stones, earthworks, knotted cords, and even sound itself to safeguard what mattered most. What's truly remarkable is how durable these methods turned out to be. Long after spoken words fade, these physical traces remain, waiting for us to interpret their silent language. You're about to discover how ancient people transformed their surroundings into vast external hard drives, storage systems that didn't just preserve data, but embedded it within culture, ritual, and daily life. We'll see how structures like Newgrange in Ireland or the Quipus of the Andes served as sophisticated repositories of knowledge, and we'll reflect on what these ingenious solutions can teach us today, in an age drowning in information yet often starving for wisdom. This isn't just a story about the past, it's about human creativity, resilience, and our timeless desire to make meaning endure. So let's begin this adventure into the encoded landscapes of our ancestors and uncover the secrets they left behind in plain sight. Long before the first alphabet was ever conceived, human societies were already mastering the art of information storage, not on parchment or clay tablets, but in the very world around them. This was the dawn of non-written knowledge, a time when essential information was woven into the landscape itself. Think about it. How do you preserve critical data across generations without a single written word? You turn to what's permanent, what's communal, and what's meaningful. Oral traditions were vital, of course. Stories, songs, and chants carried history and wisdom. But spoken words can shift over time, fade with memory, or be lost entirely. So our ancestors did something brilliant. They created tangible markers, enduring structures that served as external hard drives for their collective understanding. These weren't just random piles of rock or simple decorations. They were carefully designed systems. Stone circles like those found across the British Isles weren't merely ritual spaces. They functioned as communal databases, encoding everything from seasonal changes and astronomical events to spiritual beliefs and social laws. Burial mounds or tumuli stored genealogical data and ancestral stories within their layered earth. Patterned earthworks shaped into spirals or animal forms transformed entire landscapes into readable records. Each structure had a purpose, a meaning, a way to hold knowledge that oral memory alone could not reliably preserve. Take Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, for example. This stunning site dates back to around 9600 BCE. That's over 6,000 years before the invention of writing. What's extraordinary isn't just its age, but its complexity. massive limestone pillars arranged in circles, many carved with intricate animal reliefs. These aren't just random images, they likely served as symbolic storage, a way to encode myths, astronomical knowledge, or even hunting strategies. The arrangement of the pillars themselves might have aligned with celestial events, turning the entire site into a calendar or observatory. Here, architecture became a medium for knowledge, a way to freeze ideas in stone so they could be passed down intact. This foundational approach didn't just preserve information, it allowed cultures to build upon accumulated wisdom. Once knowledge was embedded in a monument or earthwork, it became a reference point for future generations. A stone circle that marked the winter solstice could be used to refine agricultural practices year after year. A burial mound that stored clan histories reinforced social cohesion and identity. These structures created a stable base upon which societies could grow, adapt, and innovate. They were the libraries of their time, silent, steadfast, and endlessly informative. Now, let's step inside one of these ancient libraries not made of books but of stone. Picture a massive, grass-covered mound rising from the Irish landscape, with a narrow entrance guarded by a huge, intricately carved stone slab. This is Newgrange, a passage tomb built over 5,000 years ago, older than both Stonehenge and the Great Pyramids of Giza. But it was far more than a tomb. It functioned as a colossal memory palace, a physical embodiment of knowledge designed to trigger and preserve vital information for the community. Just as a classical orator might mentally walk through a familiar building to recall points of a speech, a technique known as the method of loci, the entire society could walk through, or even just contemplate, this monument to access a shared repository of wisdom. The most breathtaking feature is its precise alignment with the winter solstice. For a few precious minutes around sunrise on the shortest day of the year, a narrow beam of sunlight penetrates through a specially designed roof box above the entrance. It travels down the long, narrow passageway, eventually illuminating the inner chamber in a dramatic burst of light. This wasn't a happy accident. It was genius engineering and profound astronomical understanding encoded directly into architecture. That single annual event served as the ultimate mnemonic trigger. It reinforced the agricultural calendar, marking the sun's rebirth and the promised return of longer days. It likely anchored creation myths and spiritual beliefs, connecting the power of the sun to the realm of the ancestors within. The entire structure was a permanent, reliable calendar in the landscape, ensuring no one would forget this pivotal turning point of the year. Every element of such a monument held specific, retrievable meaning. The arrangement of megaliths, the twists and turns of the passageway, the patterns of spirals and diamonds carved onto the stones, these weren't random decorations. They were memory cues. A particular carving might represent a specific deity or a foundational story. The position of a stone could indicate a clan's lineage or a boundary. The very act of processing through the narrow passage into the central chamber during a ritual would have created a powerful sensory and emotional experience, making the information associated with each step unforgettable. These sites were interactive, three-dimensional databases. This concept transforms how we view these ancient places. They weren't just silent, static ruins for ceremonies. They were living, breathing libraries. The knowledge stored within them was dynamic, accessed and reinforced through seasonal gatherings, storytelling, and direct experience. The community didn't need scrolls to remember their history or priests to interpret the stars. They had a built environment that did it for them. By studying the sophisticated designs of Newgrange, Bryn Celli in Wales, or Misho in Orkney, we get a privileged glimpse into the ancient mind, a mind that could organize complex cosmological, historical, and practical information into a tangible, enduring form without a single written word. Now, let's shift our gaze from towering stone monuments to the earth itself, reshaped on a truly monumental scale. Across the globe, ancient cultures embarked on audacious projects, carving enormous designs directly into the landscape. These are geoglyphs and earthworks, massive figures and patterns so large that their full form often reveals itself only from the air. They represent a breathtaking leap in the ambition of non-written knowledge storage, transforming entire valleys and deserts into vast, readable canvases. Think of the famous Nazca lines in Peru, where hundreds of precise geometric shapes and animal figures, a hummingbird, a spider, a monkey, are etched into the arid plateau. Or consider the Uffington White Horse in England, a sleek, abstract figure of a horse carved into a chalk hillside, its flowing lines maintained by communities for over 3,000 years. These weren't idle doodles on a planetary scale. They were deliberate, sophisticated acts of encoding, turning the environment into a permanent record. The purposes of these giant designs were likely as layered and complex as the cultures that created them. Many probably functioned as ritual pathways, where walking the lines of a giant spiral or animal figure was a physical act of prayer or a reenactment of a creation myth. Others served as precise astronomical markers. Certain Nazca lines, for instance, align with the setting sun during the solstices, while some of the great effigy mounds in North America, like the Serpent Mound in Ohio, align with celestial events, their curves mirroring the path of the sun or the patterns of stars. They could also have been territorial symbols, visible declarations of identity, and belonging to anyone crossing into a tribe's or a chiefdom's lands. The very scale of the undertaking was a statement of power and communal cohesion, a message written in the soil itself. Creating these figures required a staggering level of collective knowledge and skill. It demanded an advanced, practical understanding of geometry and surveying to transpose a small-scale model onto a massive landscape without any aerial oversight. The builders of the Nazca lines, for example, likely used a simple but effective grid system, scaling up their designs from smaller plots with ropes and stakes. This implies a society capable of complex planning, shared labor, and the precise transmission of technical knowledge, all without a written manual. The knowledge of how to create these forms was itself a form of encoded information, passed down through apprenticeship and practice, generation after generation. Perhaps one of the most compelling theories about the Nazca lines specifically links them directly to survival. The Nazca Desert is one of the driest places on Earth, and water was the most precious resource. Some researchers suggest that many of the lines and trapezoids point directly to underground water sources or converge on distant mountains where precious water originated. In this view, the desert was transformed into a massive hydrological map, a permanent and communal record of where to find life-sustaining water. Other lines may have mapped the movements of constellations used to predict the arrival of seasonal rains. The landscape became a library, and every line on the ground was a sentence in a book about how to live and thrive in a challenging world. These earthworks stand as a powerful testament to human ingenuity. They demonstrate a profound shift from building structures on the land to actively writing with the land. By removing layers of rock or piling up soil, ancient societies created negative and positive images that have endured for millennia. They are the ultimate durable repositories, immune to fire, flood, or the decay that threatens parchment or oral tradition. They show us that knowledge wasn't just stored in objects or stories. It was woven into the very geography, making the world itself a teacher, a calendar, and a sacred text for those who knew how to read it. But long before these massive earthworks reshaped horizons, our ancestors were using a far more intimate and equally universal canvas, the very rock beneath their feet. Before a single word was ever written, rock surfaces from the deep, sheltered caves of Europe to the sun-baked cliffs of the American Southwest served as the first libraries, storing vast troves of knowledge through the powerful language of images and symbols. This was the world of rock art and petroglyphs, a global phenomenon where painting and carving transformed stone into a durable medium for memory. Imagine the flickering torchlight of Lascaux Cave in France, illuminating breathtakingly lifelike paintings of bulls, horses, and stags that seemed to gallop across the walls. These weren't merely decorative, they were dense with meaning, encoding complex narratives about the animals that were central to survival, perhaps serving as spiritual appeals for a successful hunt or as teaching tools to pass on knowledge of animal behavior and anatomy to younger generations. Moving across the world to the desert canyons of the American Southwest, we find a different style but a similar purpose. Here, ancient Pueblo peoples pecked and carved petroglyphs, images carved directly into the rock face depicting spirals, humanoid figures with startlingly large eyes known as star people, mountain sheep, and intricate geometric patterns. A single panel might tell a multi-layered story. A pattern of dots could map a constellation, a line of figures might represent a clan's migration journey, and a specific symbol could mark a nearby source of water. These panels acted as communal bulletin boards and historical archives, their meanings readable to those within the culture. A handprint stenciled onto a wall was more than a signature. It was a declaration of presence, a claim of identity, and a connection to a specific place that could last for millennia. Nowhere is the depth of this knowledge storage more profound than in Australia, where Aboriginal rock art forms an unbroken cultural thread stretching back an astonishing 60,000 years. These paintings are far more than art. They are the physical embodiment of the dreaming, the foundational era when ancestral beings created the world. A painting of a rainbow serpent isn't just a depiction of a snake. It encodes a creation story, dictates law, and explains the formation of a specific waterhole. Other images serve as precise ecological records, detailing animal tracks, plant food seasons, and the migratory patterns of species like the barramundi fish. This visual language is a comprehensive system for storing everything from navigation routes and resource maps to moral codes and spiritual beliefs, all transmitted across hundreds of generations without a single written word. It is a testament to the power of image and story to create a living, breathing encyclopedia of human experience, permanently etched into the land itself. Yet for all the power of these silent stone libraries, the most dynamic and portable knowledge system ever devised was not carved in rock, but carried on the breath and in the mind. Oral traditions, the spoken stories, songs, and chants of a culture formed the living, beating heart of ancient knowledge networks. But to think of these as merely spoken words would be a profound underestimation. They were intricate mnemonic devices, meticulously crafted and rigorously trained, designed to hold vast quantities of information with pinpoint accuracy across countless generations. And they rarely worked alone. These oral systems developed a powerful symbiotic relationship with the physical world, using tangible markers in the landscape as permanent anchors for ephemeral speech, creating a robust and resilient method of preservation that was both flexible and incredibly durable. Consider the relationship between a story and a place. A myth isn't just told, it is often placed. A specific mountain might be the home of a deity, a particular river the site of a great battle, a unique rock formation the petrified remains of a trickster hero. By physically traveling through the landscape or simply pointing to these features during a telling, the storyteller used the environment as a massive, unchanging memory palace. The place itself triggered the memory of the story, and the story, in turn, explained and gave meaning to the place. This created an unbreakable feedback loop. You couldn't forget the story of the Great Bear because you lived in the Valley of the Bear and passed the Bear's Tooth rock formation every day. The land was the ultimate prompt, ensuring the narrative remained consistent and intact, generation after generation. This fusion of word and world reached its zenith in the art of Polynesian wayfinding. Imagine setting out across the vast, empty expanse of the Pacific Ocean in a double-hulled canoe, with no maps, no compass, and no written navigational guide. For European explorers, this would have been a terrifying leap into the unknown. For Polynesian navigators, it was a repeatable, reliable journey, thanks to an oral tradition so precise it functioned as a scientific instrument. They didn't just memorize star paths, they learned elaborate charts that cataloged the rising and setting positions of hundreds of stars for different seasons. They learned songs that described the specific feel of different ocean swells as they reflected off distant, unseen islands. They committed to memory the flight patterns of birds that indicated land was near and the subtle changes in cloud color that hinted at a lagoon below. This entire body of knowledge, a complex mix of astronomy, oceanography, and meteorology, was encoded in rhythmic chants and songs. The rhythm itself was a mnemonic tool, making the information easier to memorize and recall perfectly under the stressful conditions of a long voyage. The chants turned the entire Pacific into a charted and knowable space, all without a single written word. In West Africa, a different but equally sophisticated oral tradition flourished with the Griots. A Griot was more than a storyteller. They were a living library, a historian, a genealogist, and a social commentator, all rolled into one. Their primary tool was the spoken word, but it was often accompanied by the music of the kora, a complex harp lute, or the rhythms of specific drums. These musical elements were not mere entertainment. They were integral parts of the mnemonic system. A particular rhythm might signal the beginning of a royal genealogy. A change in melody could denote a shift to a historical narrative, and the repetitive structure of a song made lengthy lists of names and events easier to remember. The Griots were trained from childhood, undergoing years of apprenticeship to memorize the histories of empires, the lineages of families stretching back centuries, and the laws and treaties that governed society. The accuracy of this oral record was paramount, as the Griots' testimony could be called upon to settle legal disputes or legitimize a ruler's claim to power. They were the keepers of a society's identity, and they preserved it not in ink but in intricate patterns of sound and rhythm. These systems show that oral traditions were far from fragile. When combined with environmental cues, musical structure, and rigorous training, they formed incredibly robust knowledge networks. The information was not stored in one fragile place, like a single scroll in a library, but was distributed across many minds, reinforced by the immutable landscape and activated through performance. This made the knowledge dynamic. It could be adapted and updated as needed while still maintaining its core integrity. It was a living archive, constantly being rehearsed, performed, and passed on, ensuring that the most vital information a culture possessed would never be lost, even if every physical object they owned turned to dust. But the drive to encode knowledge in the landscape didn't just stop at the horizon. Our ancestors looked upward, weaving the very movements of the cosmos into the fabric of their most sacred structures. This is the realm of archaeoastronomy, where architecture and the heavens meet in a silent, precise dance. Across continents and cultures, we find monuments that function not merely as places of ritual, but as sophisticated astronomical observatories, their stones and towers acting as permanent, unerring markers of celestial time. The knowledge of solstices, equinoxes, and planetary cycles wasn't kept in fragile books. It was set in stone, creating a fusion of sky and earth that served as a perpetual, always accessible calendar for the entire community. Take, for instance, the famous heel stone at Stonehenge. For most of the year, it stands as just another silent sentinel in that mysterious circle. But on the morning of the summer solstice, something magical happens. When viewed from the center of the monument, the sun rises directly over its apex, its rays flooding through the architecture in a dramatic display of intentional alignment. This wasn't a vague gesture toward the sky. It was a precise engineered event, a way to pin the longest day of the year to an immutable point in the landscape. It told the people with absolute certainty that the sun had reached its northernmost point and would now begin its journey back, signaling a key turning point in the agricultural and ceremonial year. This single alignment encoded a critical piece of knowledge that dictated when to plant, when to harvest, and when to hold the most important rituals to ensure the sun's return. Yet for a truly comprehensive solar calendar, we must travel to the coastal desert of Peru and the site of Chancillo. While Stonehenge captures a single moment, Chancillo captures the entire year. Here on a barren ridge stand 13 towers built in a carefully spaced north to south line. For centuries, their purpose was a mystery, until archaeologists realized they formed the teeth of a colossal artificial horizon. From two distinct observing points on either side of the ridge, the entire solar year unfolds. From the western observation point, you can watch the sun rise, and throughout the year, its rising point moves steadily along the line of towers. At the June solstice, it appears at the northernmost tower. It then slowly drifts south, and at the December solstice, it rises at the southernmost tower before beginning its journey back. A person standing at the correct spot could determine the date with an accuracy of just 2 or 3 days simply by noting which tower the sun rose behind. This was a complete, baked-in solar calendar, a complex understanding of the sun's migration rendered in stone and accessible to anyone who knew how to read it. The implications of this are staggering. The knowledge required to design and build such a site, a deep, empirical understanding of the solar cycle, precise surveying skills, and the ability to execute a long-term communal construction project was embedded directly into the architecture itself. There was no need for a priestly class to hoard this information. The calendar was public, democratic, and permanent. It ensured that critical timing information for agriculture, for organizing trade missions, for coordinating religious festivals, was never lost, corrupted, or forgotten. The structure itself did the remembering for society. This celestial encoding provided a stable foundation upon which complex civilizations could be built, their rhythms perfectly harmonized with the reliable cycles of the universe, turning the chaotic passage of time into an ordered, predictable, and deeply meaningful journey. While we've seen knowledge carved into stone and painted on cave walls, the Inca civilization of the Andes Mountains developed one of the most sophisticated and portable non-written systems ever conceived, one that turned the very act of knot tying into a high art of information storage. This was the Quipu, a complex array of knotted cords that served as the administrative backbone of the largest empire in the pre-Columbian Americas. At first glance, a quipu might look like a decorative fringe or an abstract textile art project, a primary cord from which dozens, sometimes hundreds, of smaller pendant cords hang. But each element of this device was a carefully calibrated data point. The position of a knot on its cord, the type of knot used, the color of the string itself, and even the spin and ply of the fibers, every single detail was a variable that could be manipulated to store specific, retrievable information. This was a three-dimensional tactile writing system, a binary code rendered in cotton and camelid wool that allowed the Inca to manage an empire spanning thousands of miles without a single alphabetic character. Primary and most understood function of the quipu was numerical. The Inca state was a highly organized, centralized bureaucracy that needed to keep meticulous records of its vast resources. Imperial officials, known as quipucamayos or keepers of the knots, used these devices to record census data, track tributes from conquered provinces, inventory storehouse supplies of corn, beans, and weapons, and manage labor obligations. The numerical system was elegantly base 10. A figure 8 knot represented the number 1. A long knot with multiple turns could represent the numbers 2 through 9, depending on how many turns were made. And a single overhand knot signified a multiple of 10, 100, or 1,000, with its position on the chord indicating its place value. A cluster of knots at the very end of a chord might represent units, a cluster further up the chord represented tens, and so on. By reading the knots, a trained quipucamayok could instantly ascertain that, for example, a particular village owed 253 units of tribute. But to assume quipus were merely Inca spreadsheets is to dramatically underestimate their complexity. The true mystery and the source of ongoing fascination for scholars lies in their potential to encode narrative. Spanish chroniclers from the colonial era reported that quipus were used to record history, laws, and even poetry. They described how skilled readers could recite the contents of a quipu, almost as if reading a book aloud. This suggests the system went far beyond simple accounting and into the realm of a true symbolic language. The key likely lay in the other variables, the colors of the chords and the overall structure. A red chord might signify a warrior or a battle. A green chord could represent the forest or a harvest, and a specific sequence of colors might tell the story of a royal lineage or a mythic event. The quipu was a multi-sensory database. The reader didn't just see the knots, they felt them, running their fingers along the chords to interpret the data through touch as much as sight. This leads to a revolutionary and still debated theory that quipus may have encoded phonetic information, blurring the line between a mnemonic aid and a true writing system. Some researchers, like Harvard's Gary Urton, propose that the combination of knot type, chord direction, and fiber color could have represented syllables or words from the Quechua language, effectively making the quipu a form of 7-bit binary code. While this theory is not yet universally accepted, it powerfully challenges our very definition of writing. We tend to think of writing as two-dimensional marks on a flat surface, but the Inca demonstrate that a three-dimensional, tactile object could achieve the same goal, storing layered, complex, and nuanced knowledge in a durable, portable, and incredibly efficient format. The quipu stands as a stunning testament to human ingenuity, proving that the drive to record and communicate complex thought can find expression in the most unexpected forms, even in a simple yet infinitely complex knot. But the drive to encode knowledge wasn't limited to the heavens or to portable records. It also extended deep into the earth, connecting the living with the realm of their ancestors in a profound and permanent way. Across continents, from the great tumuli that dot the European landscape to the vast mound complexes of ancient North America, burial sites served a dual purpose. They were not just final resting places for the deceased, they were powerful, tangible repositories of ancestral knowledge. These earthen structures became the physical archives of a community's identity, linking genealogies, histories, and spiritual beliefs to a specific hallowed point on the landscape. The very act of constructing these mounds was an act of collective memory-making, where each basket of earth carried and deposited was a sentence written in the story of a people. The arrangement within these sites was far from random. It was a carefully coded language of social order and belief. The placement of graves, the hierarchy of who was buried where and with what artifacts, encoded the entire social structure of a community. A chieftain buried at the center of a mound with ornate grave goods of copper and shell communicated a clear message about power and status to future generations. The positioning of other burials around this central figure mapped out clan relationships and lineages, creating a three-dimensional family tree set in soil. Beyond social structure, these mounds often preserved migration stories. The successive layers of construction, like the rings of a tree, could tell a story of arrival, expansion, and settlement. A newer layer might incorporate different styles of artifacts or burial practices, silently recording the integration of new ideas or the arrival of new people, creating a stratified historical record without a single written word. Perhaps no single site exemplifies this fusion of cosmology, community, and knowledge storage more powerfully than the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio. This breathtaking effigy mound, stretching over 1,300 feet in length, is a sinuous, undulating earthwork sculpted into the form of a serpent, seemingly swallowing a large, oval-shaped egg. Its construction was a monumental undertaking, requiring a sophisticated understanding of engineering and a shared communal vision, but its genius lies in its alignment. The serpent's head aligns precisely with the summer solstice sunset, while its coils may point to other celestial events like the winter solstice sunrise and the equinox sunsets. This wasn't just a representation of a snake, it was a colossal, earthen calendar and a cosmological model. The serpent was a potent symbol in many Eastern woodlands cultures, often associated with the underworld, the earth, and the cycles of life and death. By aligning this powerful symbol with the most critical solar events of the year, the builders encoded a deep understanding of the universe's rhythms into the very shape of the land. The mound connected the community to the cosmos, providing a permanent, unchanging reference point for ceremonies, agricultural cycles, and storytelling. It told a story of creation, of celestial order, and of the community's place within that grand design. To stand before it was to read a sacred text written in grass and soil, a text that explained the turning of the world. These sites functioned as the ultimate archives of ancestry. Each new layer of construction, each new burial, added another chapter to the collective memory. The mound grew not just in size, but in significance, becoming an ever richer repository of stories and identities. They were places where the past was physically present and actively engaged with. During ceremonies or times of decision, a community might gather at the base of a great tumulus, reminding themselves of who they were by remembering who they came from. The mound was a teacher, a historian, and a monument to continuity, ensuring that the knowledge of where a people came from, what they believed, and how they were organized would endure for centuries, long after the names of the individuals within were forgotten, preserving a culture's core identity through the silent, steadfast language of earth and stone. While we often marvel at the grand monuments and mysterious geoglyphs, some of the most sophisticated ancient knowledge systems weren't built for ceremony or astronomy alone, they were built for dinner. Across the steep slopes of the Andes and the lush volcanic hills of Southeast Asia, entire landscapes were engineered into vast, living libraries of agricultural wisdom. These were not just farms, they were intricate, self-regulating systems where the very design of the land encoded centuries of hard-won understanding about water, soil, and the delicate balance of nature. The knowledge of how to survive and thrive in challenging environments wasn't stored on a page. It was terraced into mountainsides and channeled through precisely laid canals, creating a sustainable dialogue between human need and ecological reality. Consider the breathtaking rice terraces of the Philippine Cordilleras, often called the eighth wonder of the world. carved into the mountains over 2,000 years ago by the Ifugao people, this staggering staircase of paddies seems to climb right into the clouds. But its beauty is secondary to its brilliance. Every contour of this landscape is a lesson in hydrology and erosion control. The terrace's sturdy stone walls prevent the fertile topsoil from washing down the steep slopes during torrential rains. More impressively, the entire system functions like a massive, gravity-fed irrigation network. Water is captured from the mist-shrouded mountain forests and then diverted through a complex, communal system of canals and bamboo pipes, gently cascading from the highest paddy down to the lowest. The flow is meticulously managed so that every field receives exactly the water it needs, with no pumps, no engines, and no written manual. The design itself holds the knowledge. This profound understanding of water is mirrored on the island of Bali with the Subak system. This isn't just a method of irrigation. It's a socio-religious institution, a democratic water management cooperative that has been functioning for over 1,000 years. The Balinese developed a concept called Trihita Karana, which translates to the three causes of well-being, a harmony among people, harmony with the environment, and harmony with the gods. The Subak system is the physical manifestation of this philosophy. Water from a single source is shared among many farmers through a network of tunnels and weirs, with the allocation of water being decided by the community itself. The schedule for planting and harvesting is synchronized to control pests naturally, acting as a community-wide crop rotation system that eliminates the need for pesticides. The knowledge of how to maintain this delicate balance, how to share a finite resource fairly and sustainably, is embedded in the system's rituals, its cooperative governance, and the very layout of the canals. The landscape teaches cooperation. In the arid Andes, the Inca and their predecessors faced the opposite problem, not a surplus of water, but a devastating lack of it. Their response was a masterclass in hydraulic engineering. They constructed vast networks of stepped agricultural terraces, known as Andines, which transformed barren, rain-starved slopes into fertile microclimates. The stone walls of these terraces absorbed heat during the day and radiated it back at night, protecting delicate crops like potatoes and maize from frost. But the real genius lay underground. They built sophisticated hydraulic systems that captured glacial meltwater from high in the mountains and channeled it through stone-lined aqueducts to these farmlands. The knowledge of how to grade these canals for a perfect, consistent flow, how to prevent evaporation and seepage, and how to distribute this lifeline across vast distances was encoded in the construction techniques themselves, passed down through generations of practice. This embodied knowledge, the kind learned through doing, through watching one's elders, and through participating in seasonal rituals, was what kept these systems alive for centuries. There were no engineering textbooks or central water authorities. Instead, the maintenance of these terraces and canals was a communal duty, reinforced through oral tradition and ritual practice. A young farmer learned how to repair a terrace wall not from a diagram, but by helping his father. The timing for planting was not looked up on a chart. It was signaled by the arrival of a specific bird or the flowering of a particular tree, knowledge preserved in songs and stories. The landscape was both the classroom and the curriculum, a perpetual teacher of ecological wisdom that enabled societies to not just survive, but to flourish in some of the planet's most diverse and demanding environments, proving that the most vital knowledge is often written not on parchment, but in the patterns of the land. Now consider the very act of walking along these sacred paths, a physical, kinetic form of memory. This wasn't a simple stroll, it was a performative recitation. Each step along the Inca's Sek line, or Egypt's Avenue of Sphinxes, was a sentence in a story being told with the feet. participants weren't just moving from point A to point B. They were reenacting a mythic journey, tracing the path of a deity or retracing the steps of a founding ancestor. The landscape itself became a mnemonic device, where a specific turn in the path might correspond to a chapter in a creation story, and the arrival at a particular shrine would trigger the recitation of a specific prayer or song. This process of kinetic learning, of knowing by doing and by moving through space, cemented information in the mind far more powerfully than passive listening ever could. The knowledge was felt in the muscles and bones, remembered in the rhythm of the walk and the sight of landmarks passing by, making the entire body a participant in the act of preservation. This concept of the ceremonial pathway finds a fascinating parallel in the ancient Egyptian practice of the beautiful Feast of the Valley. Each year, a grand procession would carry the statues of the gods Amun, Mut, and Khonsu from the temple complex at Karnak across the Nile and into the Theban necropolis, the city of the dead. This wasn't merely a symbolic gesture. The path itself, lined with sphinxes and shrines, encoded a profound cosmological narrative. The journey from the East Bank, the land of the living and the rising sun, to the West Bank, the domain of the dead and the setting sun, was a physical reenactment of the solar cycle and the soul's journey into the afterlife. By walking this route, the entire community, priests, pharaohs, and common people alike, actively participated in and reinforced their understanding of death, rebirth, and the divine order. The path was a script, and the procession was its performance, ensuring that these complex beliefs were experienced, understood, and remembered by all. The genius of systems like the SEC was their holistic integration of nearly every aspect of life. These 41 imaginary lines radiating from the Coricancha, the Sun Temple in Cusco, did more than just point to shrines. They organized everything. Each line was under the stewardship of a specific royal lineage or clan, who were responsible for maintaining the shrines along its path and performing the necessary ceremonies at the correct times. This wove social hierarchy and civic duty directly into the cosmological map. Furthermore, the sects were intimately tied to the management of water, a sacred and vital resource. Many of the shrines or huacas were springs, fountains, or other water sources. The system therefore also functioned as a hydrological map and a legal document, encoding water rights and responsibilities within its sacred geography. A single system managed religion, social structure, calendar, and natural resource allocation, all without a single written law code. The knowledge for how to run the entire empire was embedded in the landscape, waiting to be walked and reaffirmed. These ritual pathways transformed the entire world into an interactive, three-dimensional map of meaning. For the people within these cultures, there was no such thing as empty, meaningless space. Every mountain peak was a deity, every spring was a shrine, every oddly shaped rock was a petrified mythical being. Traveling through this landscape, even for mundane purposes, was a constant act of engaging with a story. A shepherd guiding his flock would pass markers that reminded him of his clan's history. A farmer going to his field would cross a path that traced the journey of a water goddess. This constant, low-level interaction with the encoded knowledge of the land kept the culture's most vital information at the forefront of daily consciousness. It was a living, breathing education system where the environment itself was the teacher, and every journey, no matter how small, was a lesson in identity, belief, and belonging. Moving from the grand ceremonial pathways that organized entire societies, we find ourselves drawn to the intimate details etched into the very stones themselves. While the alignments of monuments captured the macro scale of the cosmos, the surfaces of these stones often held a more intricate, micro scale of meaning. Across the ancient world, the faces of megaliths were transformed into canvases for a mysterious and beautiful symbolic language. These carvings are far more than simple decoration. They are a profound and sophisticated form of non-written knowledge storage, a silent text waiting to be read by those who knew the code. To understand their purpose, we must journey to a small, unassuming island in the Gulf of Morbihan off the coast of Brittany, France. Here lies the passage tomb of Gavrinis, a masterpiece of megalithic art. From the outside, it appears as a large, grassy mound, but step inside and you are transported into a breathtaking gallery of ancient symbolism. The walls of its long passage and the great capstone of its inner chamber are almost entirely covered in a dense, mesmerizing tapestry of carvings. There are swirling spirals that seem to pull the eye into a vortex, concentric arcs that ripple like water from a dropped stone, and intricate zigzag patterns that crackle with energy. The sheer density of this artwork, hidden in a dark, enclosed space that would have been illuminated only by flickering torchlight, tells us this was a place of immense spiritual and intellectual significance. This was not art for public display, it was art for initiated minds, a sacred text in stone. So what do these symbols mean? Without a Rosetta Stone for this visual language, we may never have a perfect translation, but the patterns themselves offer compelling clues. The spiral is one of the most universal and recurring motifs. It could represent a vast number of profound concepts: the journey of the soul into the afterlife and back again, the cyclical nature of time and the seasons, or even the cosmos itself, swirling with stars and galaxies. Concentric circles and arcs might map the movement of the sun and moon across the sky, or symbolize ripples of influence and connection emanating from a sacred center. The zigzag, a common symbol across many ancient cultures, is often associated with water, serpents, or a lightning-like life force. At Gavrinis, these symbols are not placed randomly. They are composed, layered, and interconnected, suggesting a complex narrative or a set of interrelated ideas about creation, cosmology, and the nature of existence. This transforms these monuments from simple tombs or calendars into something much richer. They become three-dimensional books. Each carved stone was a page, and the entire chamber was a library. For a community that relied on oral tradition, these carvings served as the ultimate mnemonic device. A priest or storyteller standing in the dim light could use these precise, permanent images to anchor a recitation. Their finger might trace the path of a spiral while recounting a creation myth, or follow a series of arcs while explaining a genealogical lineage. The symbols triggered specific, complex information that was stored in the memory of the trained individual. The stone held the key, and the human mind held the vast story it unlocked. This symbiotic relationship between the durable image and the living oral tradition created a remarkably robust system for preserving abstract knowledge across generations. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this megalithic art is that it is not confined to one isolated culture. We see strikingly similar motifs, the same spirals, lozenges, and zigzags appearing on passage tombs in Ireland's Boyne Valley, on standing stones in Scotland, and on dolmens in Portugal and Spain. This widespread repetition is unlikely to be a coincidence. It suggests the existence of a shared symbolic language or a common system of beliefs that was communicated across vast distances through trade, migration, or shared ritual practice. A spiral carved on a stone in Newgrange would have been conceptually recognizable to someone from Brittany, even if their local stories attached to it differed slightly. This points to a connected Atlantic world where ideas flowed as freely as goods, and where knowledge was encoded in a visual vernacular that transcended local dialects and spoken languages. These silent symbols were the emojis of their day, a universal way to convey complex ideas without a single written word. But what if an entire society's knowledge needed to be carried, to be portable, to move with its people? Not every culture could anchor its memory in monolithic stones or vast earthworks. For nomadic communities, pastoralists, and empires built on trade routes, knowledge had to be as mobile as they were. This necessity sparked the invention of some of the most ingenious and intimate knowledge storage devices ever created: portable memory artifacts. These weren't grand structures fixed to the landscape. They were condensed, tactile libraries that could be held in the hands, carried in a pouch, or rolled up for a journey. They proved that the drive to preserve complex information wasn't limited to the immovable. It could be woven, beaded, and painted onto objects that traveled, turning knowledge itself into a mobile, durable, and deeply personal possession. Perhaps no single object encapsulates this idea more beautifully than the Lukasa, or long hand, of the Luba people in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo. This handheld wooden object is a masterpiece of information design. At first glance, it might look like an abstract piece of art, a carved board studded with beads and shells of different sizes, colors, and materials, arranged in seemingly patterns. But to a trained Luba royal historian, Ahembud I Elder, the Lukasa was nothing less than a tactile database, a three-dimensional map of the entire political and cultural history of the kingdom. Running their fingers over its surface, the historian could read the board. Each bead, each shell, each tiny incision was a mnemonic trigger. One cluster might represent a specific king, its color denoting his clan, its size indicating the length of his reign. A line of beads could chart the migration route of a royal lineage across the landscape. A particular shell might symbolize a key battle or a significant treaty. The Lukasa didn't store the information itself. It stored the keys to the information, which was held in the impeccably trained memory of the historian. By touching these cues, the elder could recite detailed histories, genealogies that stretched back centuries, clan relationships, and ritual protocols, all from this one compact object. It was a library you could hold in your palm. A world away on the vast North American plains, another form of portable history was being meticulously maintained. Native American tribes, particularly the Lakota, Kiowa, and other plains nations, developed the extraordinary tradition of the winter count. This was a communal calendar, a chronological record of a tribe's history painted onto a buffalo hide or, later, on cloth. Each year was represented not by a number, but by a single, powerful symbolic image that captured the most significant event of that year. The year a devastating smallpox epidemic struck might be represented by a figure covered in spots. The year of a meteor shower could be shown as a sky filled with streaks of light. The keeper of the winter count, often a designated historian, would add one new image each year after consulting with tribal elders. To read the history, the keeper would unroll the hide and, beginning from a central starting point, often a spiral or a line of images, would use each picture as a cue to narrate the events of that year, and often the stories of the people who lived through them. The hide became a visual timeline, a collective memory of the people, ensuring that even in the face of immense change and displacement, their history remained a tangible, portable thing. It was a testament to resilience, a way of saying, "We are still here and this is our story." These artifacts reveal a profound truth about non-written knowledge systems, their incredible efficiency and density. A single Lukasa board could hold the equivalent of a lengthy historical novel and a complex family tree. A winter count hide could encapsulate centuries of a community's experience in a series of elegant, minimalist symbols. They demonstrate that knowledge could be expertly condensed, stripped down to its essential elements, and encoded into a physical form that was both durable and lightweight. This made the information not only preservable but also highly transportable. A griot in West Africa could carry the history of an empire in a single drum pattern. A Polynesian navigator could hold the map of the entire Pacific Ocean in a star chart, and a Luba historian could hold the story of kings in a beaded board. These objects turned knowledge into a kind of technology compact, reliable, and accessible to those trained in its use. They ensured that the most vital stories, the laws, the genealogies, and the histories of a people would never be left behind, could survive long journeys, and would endure as long as there was someone left who knew how to read the signs. The very layout of an ancient city was far more than a collection of buildings and streets. It was a physical manifesto, a three-dimensional model of a society's deepest beliefs and most practical knowledge. Urban planning became one of the most sophisticated and all-encompassing methods of non-written knowledge storage, encoding everything from cosmological principles and social hierarchies to advanced engineering and public health directly into the lived environment. Walking through these cities was like moving through the pages of a living encyclopedia, where every turn of a corner, every alignment of a building, and every flow of water communicated a silent lesson to its inhabitants. Consider the astonishing city of Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley, which flourished over 4,000 years ago. Its most striking feature is its rigorous grid plan: wide, straight streets running north-south and east-west, dividing the city into neat, organized blocks. This was not a haphazard development. It was a masterclass in urban management and a clear encoding of a highly organized, perhaps even egalitarian, social order. The uniformity of the brick sizes used throughout the city suggests standardized weights and measures, a form of knowledge embedded in the very materials of construction. But the real genius lies beneath the streets. Mohenjo-Daro boasted a sophisticated, city-wide drainage system that was centuries ahead of its time. Each house had a bathroom connected to a network of covered terracotta drains that ran along the main streets, channeling waste and rainwater out of the city. This system represents a profound collective understanding of hygiene, hydrology, and civic welfare. The knowledge of how to keep a large population healthy was not kept in a manual. It was baked into the infrastructure, a permanent, functioning lesson in public health that every citizen benefited from daily. A world away and centuries later, the builders of Teotihuacan in central Mexico took this concept of encoded urban planning and fused it with a breathtaking celestial vision. The city's colossal scale and meticulous orientation are awe-inspiring. Its central artery, the massive Avenue of the Dead, runs for several miles, flanked by immense pyramidal structures. But this avenue is not aligned to the cardinal directions as one might expect. Instead, it is deliberately skewed 15.5 degrees east of north. Why? Because this alignment is precisely with the setting point of the Pleiades star cluster on a key date in the Mesoamerican calendar. This was no accident. The entire city was a vast astronomical instrument, aligning its primary axis with a profoundly important celestial event. The Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon are positioned along this avenue to mark significant solar zenith passages and other astronomical cycles. For the people of Teotihuacan, the cosmos wasn't an abstract concept studied by priests. It was the very framework of their daily existence. The city's layout taught them their place in the universe, synchronizing their rituals, their agriculture, and their very movement through the urban space with the rhythms of the heavens. These urban designs served as powerful tools for social instruction. The spatial organization of a city communicated clear messages about power, hierarchy, and community values. In Teotihuacan, the gradual ascent along the Avenue of the Dead towards the towering pyramids would have instilled a sense of awe and reinforced the social and religious authority of the ruling class. The segregated citadel area of Mohenjo-Daro, with its elevated structures and massive granaries, might have indicated a centralized authority managing resources. Conversely, the remarkable uniformity in the size and quality of most houses in Mohenjo-Daro suggests a society that valued social cohesion and perhaps a broader distribution of wealth than in many other ancient civilizations. The city plan itself was a silent teacher of civic values, guiding behavior and reinforcing social norms simply through its structure. You didn't need a law code to tell you how society was organized. You could see it and feel it in the width of the streets, the height of the walls, and the procession from public spaces to private dwellings. This was knowledge experienced through movement and habitation, making the city itself the greatest teacher its citizens would ever know. Water, the very source of life, was never just a practical resource for ancient societies. It was a sacred force, a subject of profound understanding, and a central character in their stories. This deep reverence for water is perhaps nowhere more beautifully expressed than in the way they wove its management directly into the fabric of their symbolic landscapes. They didn't just build infrastructure to control water. They built breathtaking monuments that celebrated it, encoding both the hard science of hydrology and the rich tapestry of their mythology into functional, everyday spaces. This fusion of the practical and the spiritual created some of the most enduring and instructive knowledge systems the ancient world ever produced. To witness this principle in its most stunning form, one must travel to the arid state of Gujarat in India and descend into the magnificent depths of Rani Kai Vav, the Queen's Stepwell. This is not a mere well, it is a subterranean temple inverted, a cathedral dedicated to water, carved down into the earth over 7 stories. It is a masterpiece of architectural and hydrological genius. In a region prone to drought, its primary function was to provide reliable access to the water table, which fluctuated with the seasons. The step design was brilliantly practical, allowing people to descend to the water's current level, while also slowing down the evaporation process and providing a cool, communal gathering place during the scorching heat. But the builders of Rani Kai Vav did not stop at pure utility. Every single surface of this massive structure, its walls, its columns, its immense staircases, is covered with over 500 principal sculptures and 1,000 minor ones, a vast pantheon of Hindu deities, celestial nymphs, and mythological narratives. Here, the act of fetching water became a spiritual pilgrimage. A woman walking down to the water source would be surrounded by carvings of Vishnu lying on the cosmic serpent, of goddesses representing prosperity, and of scenes from epic literature. The stepwell itself became a 3-dimensional textbook, teaching theology, cosmology, and social values through its art. It encoded the message that water was not just a physical necessity but a divine gift, and its careful management was a sacred duty. The knowledge of how to find, store, and conserve water was forever intertwined with the stories that gave that knowledge meaning and ensured its preservation. This intricate relationship between water and societal order was the very foundation of the world's first great civilizations. In ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, water was the difference between a fertile paradise and a barren desert. The Sumerians and their successors engineered vast, complex networks of canals that acted as the arteries of their empire, diverting river water to irrigate fields and feed growing cities like and Uruk. This was arguably the first large-scale civil engineering project in human history, requiring an advanced collective understanding of surveying, slope gradients, and silt management. But how do you maintain such a complex and vital system across generations without a centralized, permanent bureaucracy? The knowledge for its upkeep was encoded not in stone, but in law and oral tradition. The famous Code of Hammurabi, one of the earliest known sets of written laws, included specific statutes concerning irrigation. It detailed the responsibilities of farmers to maintain their sections of the canals and outlined penalties for anyone whose negligence caused flooding or water loss for a neighbor. This legal framework codified practical hydrological knowledge into societal rules, ensuring everyone understood their role in the system's survival. Alongside this written law, oral traditions, the songs sung by farmers, the instructions passed from parent to child, reinforced the techniques for desilting canals and managing water flow. The landscape itself, with its sprawling web of waterways, was a constant, visible reminder of the cooperation and shared knowledge required to sustain life in a challenging environment. The canal was more than a ditch. It was a lesson in civic responsibility and ecological interdependence. By uniting water management with powerful symbolism, these ancient societies achieved something remarkable. They created functional landscapes that were also immersive educational tools. A stepwell was both a water source and a spiritual sanctuary. A canal was both an irrigation ditch and a legal boundary. This duality ensured that the most critical technical knowledge for survival was never isolated or easily forgotten. It was reinforced every time a myth was recounted beside a sacred spring, every time a law was invoked to settle a water dispute, and every time a community gathered at the stepwell, surrounded by stone-carved lessons from their ancestors. The knowledge became sacred, and in becoming sacred, it became permanent. It was written into the very paths people walked and the water they drank, making the management of this precious resource a fundamental and unforgettable part of their cultural identity. While grand urban plans encoded knowledge on a civic scale, other ancient builders turned their focus upward, designing structures with such precise celestial alignments that they functioned as fixed, unchanging observatories. These were not buildings with telescopes or complex instruments. They were the instruments themselves, their very architecture, the placement of a single window, the gap between two walls, the interplay of light and shadow on a specific day, was meticulously calibrated to capture the rhythm of the cosmos. In an age without written manuals or digital calculators, these stone and mortar constructions became the permanent, reliable scientific tools of their time, embodying a profound and practical understanding of the sky that guided every aspect of daily life. Journey to the high desert of New Mexico, to the sprawling complex of Choco Canyon. Here, the ancestral Puebloan people constructed massive, multi-storied great houses like Pueblo Bonito, which align with cardinal directions with an accuracy that still astonishes surveyors today. But the true astronomical genius of Choco is often found in smaller, more subtle features. At the site of Fajada Butte, a spiral petroglyph is carved onto a cliff face. For centuries, until a rock slide altered the arrangement, a remarkable event occurred here. At noon on the summer solstice, a single dagger of sunlight, channeled through the gaps between three massive stone slabs, would slice directly through the center of the spiral. On the winter solstice, two daggers of light perfectly bracketed it. This was not a public spectacle. It was a precise, hidden timekeeping device, a solar marker that likely served a small group of learned individuals who used this confirmation to set the ceremonial and agricultural calendar for the entire culture. The knowledge of when to plant, when to harvest, and when to hold the most vital rituals was literally written in sunlight and stone. This same principle of architectural alignment was mastered by the Maya at sites like the Caracol in Chichen Itza. Unlike the rectangular structures around it, the Caracol is a distinctive round tower, often called the observatory. Its narrow, tube-like windows are not placed at random. They are precisely aligned with the extreme rising and setting points of Venus on the horizon. For the Maya, Venus was not just a bright star, it was a deity closely associated with war and rain. Its cycles were meticulously tracked because they were believed to influence human affairs. A window in the caracol would have framed the planet's first appearance as the evening star, signaling to the observers within that a new cycle was beginning. This architectural feature transformed a celestial event into a predictable, manageable piece of information. The knowledge of Venus's complex 584-day cycle was baked directly into the building's design, ensuring that this critical astrological and calendrical information could be accessed and acted upon by every generation that followed. The true wonder of these sites lies not just in their construction, but in the method of knowledge transmission they represent. The engineering know-how required to achieve these alignments, the understanding of astronomy, geometry, and masonry, was not written down in textbooks. It was passed down through generations via a rigorous system of apprenticeship and ritual. A master builder would teach an apprentice not through diagrams, but through direct experience, showing them how to sight a star on the horizon, how to place a foundation stone to capture a specific sliver of light, how to chant the songs that contain the numerical knowledge of planetary cycles. This process embedded astronomy directly into the cultural fabric. It wasn't a separate field of science. It was an inseparable part of religion, agriculture, governance, and identity. The act of watching the solstice sunrise from a specific rooftop was both a scientific observation and a sacred prayer. This seamless integration of knowledge and practice meant that the entire community, not just a priestly elite, benefited from this astronomical wisdom. While specialists may have made the precise observations, the entire society lived by the calendar these structures defined. The first appearance of the sun in a certain notch of a canyon wall might signal the time to begin clearing irrigation canals. The shadow crawling across a specific petroglyph could tell everyone when to prepare for a coming ceremony. The built environment served as a public, democratic clock and calendar, ensuring that critical knowledge was not hoarded but was freely available to all, encoded in the very landscape they inhabited. These stone observatories stand as a powerful testament to human ingenuity, proving that a society can achieve breathtaking scientific precision without a written word, simply by learning to read the messages the universe writes in light, shadow, and the unwavering turn of the stars. Imagine a world where every mountain, river, and cave is not just a physical feature, but a chapter in a vast, open-air storybook. This is the essence of mythological geography, a profound way of knowing where the land itself becomes a narrative map, saturated with meaning, memory, and moral instruction. For countless ancient cultures, the landscape was never empty or silent. It was alive with the stories of ancestors, deities, and primordial events. By weaving their most important tales directly into the terrain, they created an incredibly durable and interactive knowledge system. A single rock formation wasn't just a rock, it was a frozen giant from a creation story. A particular waterhole wasn't just a source of water, it was the very spot where a rainbow serpent emerged to shape the world. This practice transformed the entire environment into a mnemonic device of breathtaking scale, where geography and mythology were one and the same, ensuring that vital knowledge would endure for as long as the land itself. To understand the depth and sophistication of this system, we can look to Aboriginal Australia and the concept of the dreaming or dream time. This is not a remote past but a continuous, eternal reality that exists both in the beginning of time and in the present moment. The dreaming is the foundational era when ancestral beings, often part human, part animal, rose from the earth and journeyed across the barren landscape, singing it into existence. As they moved, they created everything we see today. They carved riverbeds with their tails, raised mountains with their bodies, and left their essence in the rocks, trees, and waterholes they formed. The paths they walked are known as dreaming tracks or song lines, and they crisscross the entire continent like an invisible web of stories. For Aboriginal people, these tracks are not metaphors. They are literal navigation routes and title deeds to the land. An elder following a songline can walk for hundreds of miles, singing the specific verses associated with each hill, valley, and water source, effectively using the song as a melodic map. The lyrics don't just describe the landscape, they encode precise, practical information about the location of water, the migration patterns of animals, and the seasonal availability of plants. But the songline is more than a survival guide. It is also a repository of lore. A story about an ancestral being breaking a taboo serves as a permanent moral lesson, its consequences etched into the shape of the land itself. The knowledge is thus multi-layered, geographical, ecological, ethical, and spiritual, all bound together in a single, unforgettable song that is performed and walked into being. A similar, though distinct, tradition flourished in the colder climes of northern Europe with Norse mythology. The Vikings and their predecessors did not see their dramatic landscape of fjords, volcanoes, and glaciers as inert scenery. They saw it as the physical evidence of epic divine struggles and cosmic events. The roaring waterfall wasn't just falling water, it was the flow of mist from the land of the giants. A vast, peculiar rock formation was explained as the remains of a troll caught in the sunlight. Specific mountains were the homes of gods, and certain caves were gateways to the underworld. This practice of attributing mythological events to specific places served a crucial historical function. It preserved a people's history and identity in the terrain. A saga about a battle between two clans might be memorialized in the names of two opposing hills. More importantly, it encoded a system of ethics and worldview. The harsh, unforgiving landscape of Scandinavia reinforced the core Norse values of resilience, courage, and fatalism. The myths explained why the world was a challenging place. It was built from the corpse of a frost giant, after all, and taught people how to conduct themselves within it. By associating every formidable geographical feature with a story of gods, giants, or heroes, the Norse created a moral compass oriented by the physical world. To live in that landscape was to be constantly reminded of the stories, the lessons, and the gods that shaped their culture, making the knowledge inescapable and perpetually relevant. This fusion of story and place created what we might call a durable, interactive knowledge system. Its durability came from the fact that the primary storage device, the mountain, the river, the forest, was essentially immutable. A scroll can burn, an oral story can be forgotten, but a mountain is far harder to erase. The system was interactive because it required active participation. Knowledge wasn't passively consumed, it was engaged with through physical movement. You learned the stories by traveling through the country, by hearing them told at the very sites where the events occurred. A young member of the tribe wouldn't just be told a story about the honey ant ancestor. They would be taken to the exact creek bed where the event happened, making the lesson visceral, immediate, and unforgettable. This constant interaction with an encoded landscape guided everyday behavior and reinforced group identity. It established rules for how to treat the land and each other, creating a powerful, shared sense of belonging. You weren't just an individual, you were part of a story that was literally written into the hills and rivers around you. You belonged to the land as much as it belonged to you, and this reciprocal relationship, narrated through myth, ensured that the most vital knowledge a culture possessed, How to live, how to survive, and what to believe was passed down through countless generations, not in a fragile library, but in the indestructible library of the world itself. Now let's consider another sense entirely, not sight but sound. For decades, archaeologists focused on what ancient sites looked like, meticulously mapping their layouts and alignments. But what if we've been missing half the story? Recent, groundbreaking research is opening our ears to a fascinating new dimension of ancient knowledge systems, the intentional use of sound. It turns out that some of the world's most mysterious ancient sites were not just silent monuments to be seen, they were carefully engineered instruments to be heard. These places were designed with astonishing acoustic properties, suggesting that sound itself was a powerful medium for encoding and transmitting knowledge, turning ritual spaces into multi-sensory experiences that resonated deep within the body and the mind. To truly appreciate this, we must descend deep underground into the Hal Saflieni hypogeum on the island of Malta. This extraordinary subterranean labyrinth, carved from solid limestone over 5,000 years ago, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the world's oldest and most impressive underground sanctuaries. Its chambers mimic the architecture of above-ground temples with carved doorways, ceilings that look like they are supported by massive stone beams, and walls painted with ochre spirals. But the hypogeum's most magical secret is not something you see, it's something you hear. One specific chamber, known as the Oracle Room, has a truly uncanny acoustic property. If you speak into a small, niche-like alcove in this chamber, your voice is transformed. It doesn't just echo, it amplifies and resonates, creating a powerful, vibrating hum that seems to fill the entire space and can be felt through the stone floor. The effect is otherworldly, making a single voice sound like a chorus or a divine presence. This wasn't an accident. The prehistoric builders carved this chamber to precise specifications to create this exact sonic effect. In the darkness of the hypogeum, lit only by flickering oil lamps, this amplification would have been awe-inspiring. A shaman or priest speaking into the niche would have had their voice dramatically altered, perhaps making it seem as if the stones themselves were speaking, or that an ancestor or deity was communicating from the underworld. This sonic trickery wasn't deceit. It was a sophisticated tool for making spiritual concepts tangible and unforgettable, using the physics of sound to create a visceral, belief-affirming experience. This phenomenon isn't isolated to Malta. Across the British Isles and Brittany, many Neolithic passage tombs also exhibit remarkable acoustic behaviors. In sites like Newgrange in Ireland, researchers have found that certain chambers are particularly responsive to specific sound frequencies, often within the range of the human voice or rhythmic drumming. These spaces can create sustained reverberations or sharp echoes, turning a simple chant or a beat into a complex, layered soundscape. Why would this be important? Think about the function of these spaces. They were likely used for initiation rituals, seasonal ceremonies, and the recitation of origin stories. In an oral culture, the accurate transmission of these stories was paramount. The acoustic properties of the chamber could have served as a powerful mnemonic aid. The echo might repeat a key phrase, reinforcing it. The reverberation could create a drone-like background that helped storytellers maintain a rhythmic cadence, much like a metronome helps a musician keep time. The sound itself, vibrating through the body in the confined, dark space, would have made the experience deeply emotional and immersive, searing the information being shared into the memory of every participant. The ceremony became a full-body experience where you didn't just hear the story, you felt it in your bones. This reveals a brilliant multi-sensory approach to knowledge preservation. Ancient societies understood that memory is not just an intellectual exercise, It is tied to emotion, to physical sensation, and to the entire body. By designing spaces that manipulated sound in these specific ways, they were essentially building a technology for the mind. The architecture itself became a cognitive tool, enhancing the power of the spoken word and ensuring that the most vital cultural information was not only heard but experienced on a profound level. The stones held a memory not just of shape and alignment, but of resonance and vibration. This sonic encoding ensured that the knowledge shared in these sacred spaces would echo not just through the chamber, but down through the generations, leaving a lasting impression long after the last note faded into silence. While we've explored how entire landscapes and monuments could track the cosmos, some ancient societies condensed their entire understanding of time itself into single, magnificent objects. These were not just calendars, they were cosmic diagrams, philosophical statements, and public monuments all rolled into one. Imagine a civilization's entire conception of time, the cycles of the sun and moon, the schedule of sacred ceremonies, even its creation myths, all masterfully carved into a vast stone disk. This was the genius of artifacts like the legendary Aztec sunstone, a breathtaking masterpiece that is far more than a simple timekeeping device. It is a dense, symbolic encyclopedia of the Aztec worldview, a permanent public reference that ensured every member of society, from the highest priest to the most common farmer, operated on a single, shared rhythmic understanding of the universe's turning. The sunstone, often mistakenly called the Aztec calendar stone, is a colossal carved basalt disc measuring nearly 12 feet in diameter and weighing over 20 tons. To stand before it is to be overwhelmed by its intricate, layered complexity. At its center sits the face of the sun god Tanatia, his tongue protruding as a flint knife, demanding the sacred nourishment of human blood to sustain his journey across the sky. This gruesome but vital concept is the very core of the Aztec cosmic engine. Without ritual sacrifice, the sun would fail to rise and time itself would end. Encircling this central deity are 4 square panels representing the 4 previous eras, or suns, that the Aztecs believed were destroyed before the current one. This immediately frames the calendar within a deep, cyclical history of creation and destruction. The next ring is perhaps the most functionally calendrical, containing 20 glyphs representing the 20 days that made up an Aztec month. But the stone's true complexity is revealed in its ability to synchronize different cycles. The Aztecs used a 2-calendar system, a 260-day sacred cycle, and a 365-day solar cycle. These 2 cycles would align only once every 52 years, a period known as a calendar round, which was met with tremendous anxiety and culminated in the elaborate new fire ceremony to ensure the world's renewal. The sunstone encoded this entire interlocking system, allowing priests to calculate these critical intersections and coordinate the elaborate ritual schedule that governed every aspect of life. Across the Atlantic, in the forests of ancient Gaul, a different but equally sophisticated approach to encoding time was discovered. The Coligny calendar, a fragmented bronze tablet dating to the 2nd century CE, is the oldest known Celtic calendar. Unlike the monumental and public sunstone, the Coligny calendar appears to have been a practical, scholarly tool, but its complexity is no less impressive. It is a lunisolar calendar, meaning it harmonizes the cycles of the moon with the solar year. The calendar is arranged in 62 consecutive months, which neatly covers a 5-year cycle. Each month is divided into 2 halves, a fortunate light half and an unfortunate dark half, marked by the full moon. The months themselves have fascinating names like Ceremonial's Seed Fall and Germanio's Winter's End, directly tying the passage of time to the rhythms of the agricultural and pastoral year. What makes the Coligny calendar truly remarkable is its use of a complex system of notation. It employs numerals, but it also uses a series of cryptic abbreviations and symbols to mark specific days as auspicious or inauspicious for activities like planting, trading, or going to war. This wasn't just about tracking days, it was about qualifying them, embedding social and religious law directly into the fabric of time itself. Both of these artifacts, though separated by an ocean and centuries, served a crucial democratic function. They acted as public references, making complex temporal knowledge accessible and standardized for the entire community. The sun stone, though likely displayed in a ceremonial precinct, would have been interpreted and explained by priests, ensuring everyone understood the timing of festivals, market days, and agricultural tasks. The information on the Coligny calendar would have been essential for druids and community leaders to plan the year's activities. This shared temporal framework was the glue that held society together, synchronizing labor, ritual, and commerce. They demonstrate with stunning clarity that iconography, a system of symbols and images, could convey unbelievably sophisticated information about time, from mathematical cycles to philosophical concepts about creation and destiny. These stones and bronzes were the hard drives of their day, storing the essential code that kept their civilizations running in perfect rhythm with the heavens and the earth. Yet the most profound knowledge carried along these routes was not about geography or goods, but about culture itself. A Buddhist monk traveling the Silk Road from India to China did not just carry scriptures, he carried an entire philosophical system, which he would then translate and adapt at a monastery funded by a local merchant. The designs on a piece of pottery traded from Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley could inspire new artistic techniques thousands of miles away. A story told in a caravanserai courtyard, a myth about the stars, or a fable about a clever animal could be absorbed by listeners from a dozen different cultures and then retold in their own languages, subtly changing with each telling yet preserving its core wisdom. These routes became the circulatory system for the world's early intellectual and spiritual life, pumping ideas, beliefs, and innovations across continents, slowly weaving together the tapestry of human thought. The goods eventually were consumed, but the knowledge that traveled with them altered civilizations forever, proving that the most valuable cargo is often intangible. But what if the very substance of a monument, the stone itself, was as important as its shape or alignment? For many ancient cultures, the choice of building materials was never just a practical decision based on what was nearby and easy to quarry. It was a deeply symbolic act, a way to weave geography, ancestry, and spiritual belief directly into the architecture. The physical matter of their constructions became a powerful carrier of cultural knowledge, encoding stories of origin, journeys, and sacred power in the weight and grain of the rock itself. This practice transformed simple stone into a narrative medium, where the act of moving a rock from one place to another was as meaningful as the carvings placed upon it. Consider the enduring mystery of Stonehenge's bluestones. The massive sarsen stones that form the famous outer circle are impressive, but they were sourced locally from the Marlborough Downs just 20 miles away. The real puzzle lies with the smaller, inner bluestones. Geological analysis has revealed that these distinctive spotted dolerite rocks originated in the Preseli Hills of Wales, over 150 miles away. For a Neolithic society without the wheel or draft animals, transporting 80 of these multi-ton stones across such a vast distance, including crossing the treacherous River Avon, was a staggering logistical feat. This wasn't a random choice, it was a deliberate, obsessive undertaking. Why go to such incredible effort? The leading theory suggests these stones were not merely building materials, they were sacred relics. They may have been believed to hold inherent spiritual power or healing properties, perhaps originating from an even older Welsh monument that was deconstructed and moved to sanctify the new site. Their journey could have represented an ancestral migration, physically transplanting a piece of their homeland to their new territory in a powerful act of symbolic connection. The bluestones were more than rock. They were a tangible link to a distant past and a faraway land, their very presence telling a story of pilgrimage, belief, and identity that was literally set in stone for millennia. This concept of spiritually charged material finds a powerful parallel on the remote shores of Easter Island. The iconic Moai statues, those brooding giants gazing inland, are almost universally carved from a single type of volcanic tuff from one quarry, the caldera of Rano-Raraku. This was not the only available stone on the island, but it was clearly the most symbolically significant. The Rano-Raraku tuff was relatively soft and easier to carve, but its importance went far beyond mere workability. The Rapa Nui people believed this particular stone was imbued with mana, a profound spiritual essence or power. By carving a moai from this sacred quarry, they were not just shaping a statue, they were harnessing and concentrating this spiritual energy into a physical form. The statue acted as a vessel for mana, which was then activated when the eyes were finally inlaid with coral and obsidian, transforming it into a living conduit between the earthly world and the spirit realm. The choice of material was therefore absolutely critical. A moai made from any other rock would have been inert, a mere effigy without the vital force needed to watch over and protect the community. The knowledge of which stone held power and the rituals required to work it was essential cultural knowledge preserved through generations of master carvers. This practice of meaningful material selection reveals a universal human impulse to infuse the physical world with story. The labor of transport was itself a form of reverence and a communal ritual. The journey of the bluestones from Wales to Salisbury Plain, or the movement of a finished moai from the quarry to its coastal Ahu platform, was a physical manifestation of a society's values and priorities. It demonstrated a willingness to expend enormous collective energy for a symbolic goal, proving that what a culture builds with can be just as eloquent as what they build. The stone carried its own biography from its geological origin to its arduous journey to its final, sacred placement. In this way, ancient societies turned their monuments into multi-layered texts. You could read the alignments for astronomical knowledge, the carvings for mythological stories, and the very rocks themselves for a deep map of their beliefs, their connections to the land, and their understanding of the spiritual forces that animated their world. But beyond the grand processional avenues and the sacred stones, ancient societies also encoded their deepest understandings of the world in a more delicate, yet equally profound medium, the living, breathing tapestry of the cultivated garden. These were not merely plots for growing food or spaces for leisure. They were meticulously designed landscapes that wove together advanced horticultural knowledge, profound philosophical principles, and deep spiritual belief into a single harmonious whole. From the legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, to the serene Persian Peri Disa, a term meaning walled garden that gives us our word paradise, these enclosures were living libraries of botanical and ecological wisdom. Every element, from the specific selection of plants to the precise flow of water through irrigation channels, was a deliberate choice encoding a civilization's relationship with nature, its pursuit of order, and its vision of utopia. The arrangement of these gardens was a direct reflection of a society's accumulated practical knowledge. The famed gardens of the Indus Valley civilization, for instance, featured sophisticated irrigation and drainage systems that mirrored the hydraulic engineering of their cities, demonstrating a clear understanding of water management and soil health. In Persia, the challenging arid environment was mastered through the Qanat system, a network of underground canals that tapped into groundwater from foothills and transported it for many miles without losing a drop to evaporation. This hydrological genius allowed for the creation of lush, verdant oases in the middle of the desert, proving that the garden was first and foremost a triumph of ecological adaptation and sustainable technology. The knowledge of which plants could thrive in specific microclimates, which species could be grafted together, and how to fertilize soil using composted waste was all hard-won practical intelligence, preserved and displayed in the very health and diversity of the garden's flora. Yet these spaces were far more than just functional agricultural stations. They were three-dimensional representations of a culture's cosmology and philosophy. The classic Persian paradise garden was laid out in a rigid chahar bog design, a quadrilateral layout divided into 4 equal parts by water channels, symbolizing the 4 Zoroastrian elements of sky, earth, water, and plants, or the 4 rivers of paradise described in the Quran. This geometric order was an attempt to impose a perfect divine symmetry onto the chaotic natural world, creating a miniature utopia on Earth. The pathways were not just for walking, they were for contemplation, guiding a visitor on a spiritual journey from the outer world toward a central pavilion or water source that represented the divine center of the universe. Similarly, the Japanese practice of shake, or borrowed scenery, integrated distant mountains or forests into the garden's design, physically and philosophically erasing the boundary between the human-made and the natural, and encoding a Buddhist principle of harmony and interconnectedness with the entire world. These gardens also functioned as incredible biodiverse repositories, or living libraries, for a vast array of plant species, each with its own practical and ritual significance. A single monastic garden in medieval Europe, for example, would have been carefully partitioned into distinct areas. One section might contain herbularious herbs like sage, rosemary, and thyme for culinary and medicinal use. Another would be the hortus for vegetables like leeks and onions, and a viridarium for trees and flowers to decorate the church altar. Each plant was a volume in this living encyclopedia. A monk tending the garden wasn't just a gardener. He was a librarian and a pharmacist, knowing that the foxglove in the corner could be used to treat heart conditions, a knowledge that would centuries later give us digitalis, or that the willow bark could ease pain, laying the groundwork for aspirin. This curation of species was a continuous, evolving experiment in botany and pharmacology, where knowledge was passed down not through fragile scrolls but through the act of planting, harvesting, and preparing remedies season after season. This approach created a truly dynamic knowledge system. Unlike a static stone carving, a garden is alive. It grows, evolves, and responds to its environment. A failed planting one season taught a lesson about soil composition that would be applied the next. A new plant acquired through a trade network could be experimented with, its properties discovered, and its uses added to the oral tradition of the gardeners. The design itself could be subtly altered, pathways shifted, or water features added to reflect new aesthetic ideas or spiritual insights. The garden was not a frozen archive but a living, breathing entity that learned and adapted alongside the society that tended it. It allowed practical knowledge of ecology and spiritual principles of order to be cultivated, quite literally, evolving in real time and ensuring that a culture's understanding of the natural world remained as vibrant and alive as the most flourishing paradise within its walls. For these societies, survival itself was an act of profound observation, a continuous dialogue with the natural world where every bent blade of grass, every displaced stone, and every faint impression in the soil told a story. This was not a casual hobby. It was a rigorous science of attention, developed over millennia of intimate coexistence with other species. Indigenous hunting and gathering cultures honed this intricate art of reading animal behavior and plant cycles into a sophisticated body of ecological knowledge. But this wisdom could not be risked to the fragility of individual memory alone. To ensure its survival, it was woven into the very fabric of their culture, encoded into the rhythms of songs, the plots of stories, and the names given to specific landmarks, transforming the entire environment into a living, breathing textbook that could never be lost or destroyed. This process of education was deeply immersive and began in childhood. Among many Native American tribes, a young person learning to track was not handed a field guide. Instead, they were taken to a particular, unmistakable rock formation that, from a certain angle, perfectly resembled the footprint of a deer, or they were brought to a specific, ancient pine tree whose bark bore scars that mimicked the claw marks of a bear. These natural features served as permanent, communal teaching aids. An elder would point to the stone deer print, using it as a reference to then examine the actual, fainter track nearby, explaining the depth that indicated the animal's speed, the spacing that revealed its size, and the direction of the dew claw that showed which way it was headed. The landscape itself was the classroom, and its lessons were standardized. Every generation learned from the same enduring rock, the same scarred tree, ensuring the knowledge was transmitted with astonishing accuracy across hundreds of years. This knowledge was far more than a collection of hunting tips. It was a comprehensive, sustainable management system. The songbird people of southern Africa, for instance, possess an encyclopedic understanding of animal reproduction cycles. Their hunting practices are governed by strict oral laws that prohibit hunting pregnant females or young animals, ensuring healthy population levels. This isn't an abstract conservation theory. It's a practical code embedded in stories that describe the grief of an animal mother who loses her young, fostering a sense of empathy and reciprocal relationship. Similarly, Aboriginal Australians' Dreamtime stories don't just explain how the kangaroo got its pouch. They often encode the animal's migratory routes, its feeding habits, and the locations of water sources it uses during drought. The story makes the data memorable and imbues it with a sacred significance that a simple list of facts could never achieve. The ceremony and the practical are inseparable. A dance might reenact the digging of a particular tuber, not only showing the technique but also honoring the plant's spirit and reinforcing the rule that only the mature tubers are to be harvested and that the roots must be replanted to ensure future growth. This deep-time ecological wisdom resulted in a truly sustainable way of life. These societies managed their environments not for quarterly gains, but for generational continuity. They used controlled burning to clear underbrush and encourage the new growth that attracts game, a practice now recognized by modern forestry as vital for ecosystem health. They understood the symbiotic relationships between species, how the presence of a certain bird might indicate a nearby beehive, or how the flowering of a specific shrub signaled the time to hunt a particular animal that would be fat and plentiful. This knowledge was a dynamic, ever-evolving dialogue. An unusual animal behavior one season, perhaps a shift in migration patterns, would be observed, discussed by the elders, and incorporated into the oral tradition, adapting the body of knowledge for future generations. The environment was not a warehouse of resources to be plundered, but a relative, a teacher, a sacred text whose every detail held a lesson in balance, reciprocity, and the intricate, beautiful web of life that sustains us all. Now imagine setting out across the seemingly endless expanse of the open ocean, with no land in sight for weeks, guided only by the stars above, the waves below, and the patterns of birds in the sky. For seafaring cultures like the Polynesians and the Vikings, this was not a terrifying leap into the unknown but a repeatable, reliable journey, made possible by one of the most sophisticated mental mapping systems ever devised. Their navigational knowledge was a living, breathing encyclopedia of the natural world, meticulously memorized and encoded not in written charts, but in chants, stories, and the deeply ingrained wisdom of practical experience. They learned to read the language of the sea and the sky, transforming the entire Pacific and Atlantic Oceans into a familiar, navigable highway. The pinnacle of this non-written science was undoubtedly the Polynesian star compass, a conceptual masterpiece that organized the entire celestial dome into a precise mental instrument. This wasn't a physical object you could hold. It was a complex, abstract framework held entirely in the mind of the Master Navigator, or PWO. The horizon was divided into 32 directional houses, much like the points on a mariner's compass, but each house was defined by the rising and setting points of specific key stars and constellations. The star known to us as Arcturus, for instance, was called Hokulea, Star of Joy, and its zenith position directly over the Hawaiian Islands made it a critical beacon. As the Earth rotates, different stars rise and set in these designated houses, creating a rotating celestial clock. A navigator would know that when a certain star rose in a specific house, it was time to steer in a particular direction. But the genius of the system was its redundancy. If clouds obscured the stars, the navigator could simply shift their attention to the next star scheduled to rise in that same house, maintaining their course through the night. Yet the star compass was only one layer of this multi-sensory navigation system. The Polynesian voyagers were also master oceanographers, able to read the subtle patterns of the waves with a sensitivity that seems almost supernatural to us today. They recognized that the dominant ocean swells generated by distant trade winds and weather systems provided a constant, reliable directional guide. Even on a calm, seemingly featureless day, a trained navigator could lie down in the bottom of the canoe and feel the gentle, persistent roll of these deep water swells through the hull, using them to maintain a steady bearing long after the stars had faded at dawn. They also learned to interpret the refraction of these swells as they wrapped around islands, detecting the faint, intersecting wave patterns that signaled land was near long before it was visible to the eye. This knowledge of tilapa, underwater lightning, the flickering streaks of light caused by deep wave refraction, was another tool to confirm their position. The ocean itself was a dynamic, vibrating map, and they had learned its every contour. The third critical element in this trinity of wayfinding signs came from the air. The behavior of specific bird species provided invaluable short-range navigation aids. The flight patterns of homing birds like the Mohenjo-Daro or white tern were particularly telling. These birds fly out to sea at dawn to fish but must return to their nests on land each evening. A navigator spotting these birds flying in a steady, purposeful direction in the morning knew they were heading out to their fishing grounds away from land. But seeing them in the late afternoon, heavily laden with fish and flying in a straight, determined line, was a sure sign they were returning to their island home. The type of bird also mattered. Some species had a limited range, so their presence indicated land was within a 50-mile radius, while others could venture much farther. This avian intelligence turned the sky into a signaling system, where every wingbeat could tell a story of nearby atolls or distant shores. All of this immense, complex knowledge, the positions of hundreds of stars, the feel of different swells, the habits of 24 bird species was committed to memory through an elaborate oral tradition of chants and songs. These chants were not simple rhymes. They were highly structured mnemonic devices. their rhythm and cadence designed to make vast quantities of technical information easier to memorize and recall perfectly under the stressful conditions of a long voyage. A chant might catalogue the succession of stars that would rise over a journey from Tahiti to Hawaii, while another would describe the specific sequence of wave patterns to expect. This oral transmission required years, often decades, of rigorous apprenticeship. A young navigator would train by accompanying masters on shorter voyages, listening to the chants, feeling the waves, and connecting the theoretical knowledge to the direct sensory experience, until the star paths and sea signs were etched into their very being. This system created a distributed, living library of navigation, ensuring that the knowledge was preserved across generations in multiple minds, making it resilient and adaptable, a true testament to the power of the human mind to store, process, and act upon incredibly complex environmental data without a single written word. The ingenuity of ancient societies in encoding knowledge without writing reveals a profound understanding of human cognition, our relationship with the environment, and the enduring power of symbolism. These were not primitive attempts at record-keeping. They were sophisticated, multi-layered systems designed to outlast individuals, empires, and even languages themselves. From the celestial stone circles of Europe to the intricate knot records of the Andes, these methods demonstrate a universal human drive to make meaning endure, to pass on the hard-won wisdom of one generation as a gift to the next. What's truly breathtaking is the diversity of their solutions. They looked at a barren desert and saw a canvas for giant hydrological maps. They felt a piece of string and envisioned a binary code for storing poetry. They listened to the echo in a dark chamber and recognized a tool for making myth unforgettable. They didn't just use the resources they had, they saw the potential for knowledge storage in everything around them. Earth, stone, sound, and story became the media for their most vital data. This exploration into the past holds up a fascinating mirror to our present digital age. We now live in an era of unprecedented information abundance, where the entirety of human knowledge is seemingly just a click away, stored on servers in vast, invisible data farms. Yet we grapple with information overload, the fragility of digital formats, and a creeping sense of disconnection from the knowledge we consume. The ancient systems we've explored offer powerful counterpoints. They teach us about sustainability not in an environmental sense, though that is often connected, but in terms of knowledge sustainability. The Quipu, the Songline, the Subak irrigation system, these were decentralized, redundant, and deeply integrated into the fabric of community life. Knowledge wasn't hoarded by a tech elite. It was shared, performed, and walked into being by everyone. It was made durable not through constant software updates, but through its sacred connection to culture, ritual, and the immutable landscape. Perhaps the most poignant lesson is the holistic nature of these ancient archives. They refused to separate science from spirituality, practical knowledge from moral philosophy, or individual memory from communal identity. The stepwell of Rani Kaivav was both a hydrological marvel and a theological textbook. The Navajo elder teaching a youth to track using a specific rock formation was imparting ecology, ethics, and ancestry in a single, powerful lesson. In our modern pursuit of efficiency and specialization, we have often fractured knowledge into disconnected silos. We have outsourced memory to external devices, potentially at the cost of our own cognitive capacities for deep, sustained attention and recollection. The ancient art of memory, the method of loci that turned a monument into a memory palace, challenges us to re-engage with information on a deeper, more personal, and multi-sensory level. As we move forward, we might ask ourselves how we can integrate the wisdom of these analog systems into our digital world. How can we design our technology to be more like a songline, connecting information to place and story, making it more meaningful and memorable? How can we build digital communities that share knowledge as robustly and sustainably as the Balinese Subak cooperatives share water? The answers are not about abandoning our technology, but about enriching it with principles that are, ironically, as ancient as humanity itself. The drive to preserve and share knowledge is what makes us human. The methods change from chance to cloud servers, but the impulse remains. By looking back at these incredible, enduring systems, we don't just learn about the past, we find inspiration for building a more meaningful, connected, and human-centered future for